But Rip, did the Orioles, I guess, avoid something bad here when it comes to Jeff Hoffman? Because obviously it's a risk if you bring him in and the physical gets flagged, but this is a guy that had really great success in Philadelphia last season.
I think it's a layered conversation. I think it's a really good conversation to have here about Jeff Hoffman because you're right. Decorated, was one of the sought out relief pitchers here this offseason. And yeah, it looked like a deal was in place. And earlier in the week and last week, touched a little bit on how it's disappointing when something like this falls through because, you have an agreement in place, you're feeling good, but then, your staff who you hire and trust to make these medical decisions is saying, hey, we're not comfortable with this. But Zach, I think that to take this to the next level, it's not just an Orioles thing here. Yeah. It was another team. The Atlanta Braves also flagged him. But the reason why we're talking about this today, and we'll continue to evaluate it, is that Hoffman had his press conference with the media today virtually. And Zach, there were some comments made specifically of kind of showcasing what we were talking about. So can you detail a little bit, Zach, on what Hoffman is saying was the difference between the Blue Jays physical and the one he had with, say, the Baltimore Orioles?
Yeah, so pretty much comes out today. Keegan Matheson, who covers the Blue Jays for MLB.com, was kind of detailing throughout the press conference what was being said. And he brought up that Jeff Hoffman, pretty much he called his physical results a surprise and said he didn't agree with them. And he then added, the Blue Jays see me for what I am. I'd rather be in a place like that anyway. He then later goes on to talk about, they ask, hey, does this give you extra motivation, stuff like that? With the Orioles, he then says, yes, you can add them to the list. Definitely, I think one of those situations where, yeah, you're going to be mad if, he clearly agreed to sign with the Orioles. That's where he, it's not like the Orioles offered him something. They had to do a physical beforehand, all that stuff. It seems like this was a done deal. He was coming to Baltimore. It was all but over. And then the physical gets in the way. So apparently, according to them, same thing popped up for Toronto. They saw the exact same thing, but he said that the Blue Jays go more off of how the player feels rather than the MRI, which brings us back to Rip's point of, hey, is it unfortunate that Jeff Hoffman failed his physical and isn't with the Orioles? Yeah. But Rip, to your point, if he's going to fail the physical and you pass him anyway, and you sign him anyway, why did you bring in the doctors for the physical to ask for their recommendation? Why did you hire these guys to be like, hey, in your professional opinion, is this worth it? So it's one of those things where, yeah, maybe the Blue Jays doctors are sitting there going, because same thing popped up. Maybe they're going, hey, he feels good. He said it doesn't bother him. Let's go. But the only way that we can tell, Rocco, when you talk about, is this something the Orioles will regret? Is this maybe a miss? Is this whatever? We don't know for another year or two. If unfortunately, and I don't hope it happens, if Hoffman is on and off the IL all year next year with, shoulder, elbow, whatever it is, and he doesn't get in his groove and can't really help, then the Orioles got away with one. But if he goes and he's perfectly fine, then it's like, damn, so it really wasn't that big. So only time will tell.
And to just, before we get into Rip, because he's going to have the most, just says some fantastic things on the baseball side. What a guy he is. Just value his opinion so much. Try not to get fired here, people. That's a deal. Jeff Hoffman had a 2.17 ERA last season, 89 strikeouts, 10 saves. He was great in relief for the Phillies. And on top of that, he was an all-star. But to your point, Zach, if someone asks me how I feel, if I have one of the biggest events of my life coming up and I'm feeling a little under the weather, I might lie and say, I'm feeling all right. Like, I'm going to go. If you have $40+ million on the table and they simply ask you, and I really hope for the Blue Jays' sake, they did more than just ask the guy how he feels rather than just check out the MRI and say, oh.
Blue Jays have been striking out a lot of free agents. Maybe they were just like, hell, you want to come here?
But here's my thing. And you know me, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the Orioles did great regardless of what happens. It's just not the person I am. I'm not saying we are, but it's just like going to try to tell you how it is with this stuff. with Jeff Hoffman, man, would you rather the Orioles sign a guy that has injury history, has an MRI flagged, when they have their closer, who is one of the best in baseball, coming back from Tommy John surgery, when they've had injury history in the past? And unfortunately, you can't help it. But like, I'd rather them not do this, flag the MRI and say, you know what, buddy, we're not going to take the risk. Because like you said, if he's done like an on the IL, off the IL this season, it's like you can't deal with that as the O's. And Rip, I know you're going to say some good stuff here about this, but what are your thoughts? Like, did they dodge a bullet? Would you have liked them to bring in Jeff Hoffman, or do you think there's better options out there bullpen wise?
Well, I mean, again, stuff wise, when you look at the guy, and if you knew that you were to get that Jeff Hoffman for the next 3 years, any team would sign up for that. If you saw the Jeff Hoffman for that. But this is the case here, and you look at go back to with the doctors, and I want to point something out about him saying they cared more about how I feel. So maybe this gives you guys a little bit more insight to this when it comes to MRIs and injuries for players. Different organizations are going to have different philosophies or how they're going to talk about it, because some things that could be already discovered with imaging, that could already kind of been there for a little bit. Now, if you're having a physical every year, obviously you're going to have a better indication. Okay, are things deteriorating or what's happening? But in this case for Hoffman, my guess is the Orioles and the Braves were going, we don't like the habit that we're seeing here. And you're saying you're feeling good, which we get, but what we're seeing over the years is just becoming concerning. And so then the report was that the Orioles changed their deal for Hoffman, right, Zach? So they changed the deal. So there's that case.
Yeah, Baltimore
right?
Banner, Andy Koska put out in his article that we don't know what the deal was, but the Orioles did not take their deal back. They readjusted it to what they felt with the injury. They thought it was his worth. And by that time, apparently he had already re-engaged in negotiations elsewhere, and he ended up in Toronto.
And the last thing to say about the comments then about him saying with the Blue Jays weren't as worried, they were worrying about the field. I agree that is definitely something that organizations can look at and go, you know what? Is it bothering you? Because the options are, what are you going to do? Is it, do you play through it and you just hope it keeps going? And then eventually, that's something you're going to have to handle down the road. Or is it something right now where you say, hey, you know what? We're done. So the case for Jeff Hoffman, it could be two different ways. He might not have an injury whatsoever, and the Blue Jays are going to reap the benefits, and so is Jeff Hoffman. And that's something they're saying right now we're willing to take. And Rocco, to your point, if you're Baltimore, because of their situations, they wanted to go with something that's more of a quote-unquote sure thing. And I'm not going to say that Kittredge is more of a sure thing, but he's had his own arm issues. But clearly, he bounced back from his arm situation, had a great year last year, and then it's a one-year deal where you can move on. Someone was going to pay Hoffman that price given this risk, and the Blue Jays did. And I'll tell you what, the last thing, he was going to be ready to face the Orioles. I guarantee you, teams, players, when they want to make a point of like, hey, I'm going to show you, I would not be surprised. It's going to go two different ways. He's going to either light up the Orioles or the Orioles are going to light him up. There's nothing in between. But players take that personally, and Jeff Hoffman just added the Braves and the Orioles onto that list.